Yes, Jackie, I was at the count overnight, and I think it's fair to say at the start of that, Labour figures were quietly confident. They were predicting a reasonable win. By the end, though, there was genuine shock at this actual victory. I mean, at one point, the Scottish Labour leader, Keir Starmer, was standing right behind me, simply mouthing the words, "wow," over and over again. Now, of course, yes, Labour has doubled their MPs in Scotland. They've gone, though, from 1 to 2. So clearly still a long road to travel if they're going to try and reclaim the dominance they had here before 2014, before the independence referendum. On camera today, Labour figures playing it quite humble, I would say. They're quite reluctant to be drawn on how many seats they might be hoping to target at the next general election in Scotland. Off camera in private, some have said that figure is at least 20. Now, clearly for the SNP, a hugely disappointing day. There was some expectation management going on ahead of this. One MP told me it felt a bit like 2017 to them when they'd struggled to get their vote out. They would say there were specific circumstances in this by-election, of course, anger at Margaret Ferrier. That wouldn't be in play, they thought, at a general election. Nevertheless, this result will be a difficult sell for new First Minister Humza Yousaf, who of course will be heading to his party conference in Aberdeen next weekend. By complete contrast to that, it did really feel today almost like Keir Starmer would be floating on a cloud to his conference now in Liverpool.
The morning after the night before in Rutherglen and Hamilton West.
We've made history here!
17,845!
Labour excitement hasn't subsided. They've doubled their MPs in Scotland from 1 to 2 with a huge win over the SNP.
A friend for me.
Welcome
to Scotland's newest MP, Michael Shanks!
The party poured resources into winning this seat from the SNP, whose former MP, Margaret Ferrier, was ousted for breaking COVID rules. Their message is one of change.
We've talked to so many people during this by-election who are struggling with the cost of living, who are struggling on an NHS waiting list, who are struggling to make ends meet. Those are the people that I'm going to spend my time as the MP fighting for.
They said that we couldn't change the Labour Party, and we did it. They said that we couldn't win in the south of England and the north of England, and we did it. They said you'll never beat the SNP in Scotland. And Rutherglen, you did it!
A Labour win was expected, but this was a Rutherglen rout. A swing of more than 20% pushed the SNP's Katie Loudon into second place.
Was the Scottish voters today saying, "We love Keir Starmer," or was it simply a protest vote against the SNP in this area?
Thousands of people went out yesterday, despite the weather, to positively vote for Labour. So nobody can translate this into a negative. It is a historic day.
This is George Downing Street for you?
Look, I've always said that if we're to get the Labour Party from where we landed in 2019 to a general election victory next time, that the path ran through Scotland.
In Rutherglen, Gaelic for the Red Valley, this result really matters for Labour's momentum. They see it as a big step forward in the fight to prove the party can come back in its former Scottish heartlands.
Labour absolutely walked this. Now, of course, the result of one well-publicised by-election with a relatively low turnout doesn't guarantee a smooth path to Downing Street for Keir Starmer, but it does shift the narrative of Scottish politics. Labour is back as a serious force to be reckoned with in Scotland. It's something that will heap pressure on the SNP and on their leader Humza Yousaf, who doesn't enjoy the same popularity as his predecessor Nicola Sturgeon had before she resigned, and is of course coping with that very public police probe into his party's finances.
The SNP, we didn't do enough. We know that there was contextual factors. Margaret Ferrier's reckless actions, the police investigation, of course. But we've got to reflect, I've got to reflect, the party has to ensure we've got a good campaign machine behind us, but also that we're inspiring people with a message. We clearly got a message from the voters of Rutherglen and Hamilton West that the SNP has lost some trust in that seat. We've got to make sure we regain it.
Thank you so much, everyone. Fantastic campaign.
After a 3-year political storm, the timing of this by-election result has delivered a gift for Keir Starmer to take to his party's conference this weekend. Labour still has a long way to go to recover in Scotland, but for now, the smiles are hard to shift.
Well, joining me now from Glasgow is the polling expert, Sir John Curtis, who's a Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University. Thanks so much for joining us, Professor. Labour call it a seismic victory. They would, wouldn't they? How would you describe it?
Well, I think, to be honest, that is a fair description, in that for the first time, really, since the independence referendum, we've had a result that is more redolent of what Scottish politics used to be like before that referendum, as opposed to the post-referendum era of SNP dominance. Let me give you two examples. If you take the result in Rutherglen and assume that the swing, 20% swing from the SNP to Labour Party were to be replicated everywhere, you get the Labour Party on roughly 40 seats, which is what they got in 2010, the last election before the independence referendum. Equally, if you actually look at Labour's share of the vote in Rutherglen, 59%, it's only 2 points adrift of the 61% that Labour got in that constituency in 2010. And it's a very, very long time indeed where the Labour Party has really had a result that suggested that maybe finally they might be in a position to begin to reverse the serious damage that was done to them in the wake of the independence referendum.
I suppose on exactly that point, by-elections, as you often remind us, are a very different beast to general elections, you know, protest votes, disgruntled voters staying at home. Is it possible to say whether the results are giving a strong indication of what might happen as we head towards a general election?
On its own, no. I think the point is you should read this by-election together with the results of the opinion polls into how people in Scotland say they will vote at the next Westminster election. That's pretty consistently been showing an 11-point swing over the last couple of months. Indeed, another poll out this evening also comes up with that figure. Now, that's well below the 20% swing in Rutherglen. But the point is you put the two things together and you then have to come to the conclusion that the Labour Party is now mounting its most serious challenge to the SNP's dominance of Scotland's Westminster representation since 2014. And the other way to look at it is this. Together with the result in Selby, we've now had two by-elections in which the Labour Party has managed to increase its share of the vote by more than 20 points. When's the last time we saw Labour putting in those kinds of by-election performances? Well, it was before the 1997 general election. So yes, if you compare, you should compare by-elections with by-elections, but even by the standard of by-elections, these are beginning to be the kinds of performances that you might expect an opposition to register if they are got a chance of winning the next election. I think, therefore, what we'll now be looking to see is whether or not in Mid-Bedfordshire and in Tamworth 2 weeks hence, whether or not Labour also again begin to register a big increase in their support.
And I mean, just in terms of what this means for the SNP, they had to concede today. They've taken a bit of a kicking. But what does it mean for them, briefly, in their hopes of independence?
Well, I mean, so far as the hope of independence is concerned, their only immediate hope of trying to get a referendum was if we ended up with a hung parliament in which they might eventually have leverage over a minority Labour administration. That becomes less likely the fewer SNP MPs there are and the greater the probability of Labour winning an overall majority. And that, of course, is the ultimate significance of Labour gaining ground in Scotland. It is that it makes it more likely that Sir Keir Starmer will be the Prime Minister with an overall majority.
Professor Curtis, thanks so much for talking to us. Thank you.